do have a couple calls to round us out here. Let's start with Kendall in Seattle. Hi, Kendall. You are on the air.
Kendall!
Hello, loves. How are you guys?
We're good.
Doing great. Great to hear from you.
Good. I'm doing well. Okay, this is a mouthful. Let me just try and figure out what I'm trying to say and put it into words. Okay.
Totally.
Okay. So I made this Facebook post that we were all kind of discussing, and Vern was like, "Hey, you should call it into secular sexuality." I was like, "Sure." So essentially, I was on this thread where I was talking to a bunch of people in a group about if you are not in the mood for sex, do you think that it is moral or acceptable to kind of give your body to them and say, okay, I don't want to do this, but I know that you want sex. So that's part of the things that, you need out of a relationship. I'll have sex with you X amount of times a week, month, whatever. Because I see a lot of particularly women
fulfilling their wifely duties.
Right, they don't have the same high sex drive, and maybe they don't hate sex, but they don't really want to do it in the first place. It was the conversation was about faking orgasms. That's what it was, and so a lot of women were saying, "Well, I usually only fake it when I didn't want to have sex in the first place, and I just want it to be over." And I thought that is so heartbreaking to me.
It is,
and I just thought maybe you guys would have something to weigh in on that.
So I think there's an important distinction there between not in the mood and don't want to. There is
that's a good point.
Yeah. There's a very big distinction there where I know I can not be in the mood, but I can just be like, okay, sure. And then there are times where I really just don't want to. And I think it's important to define which one of those times we're talking about.
Right, and I would say probably in this discussion it was more I didn't really want to, but they coerced me into it. Which
that's what it
to me,
sounds
I
like. Yeah,
feel that that's not okay in my personal super liberal opinion. I feel like enthusiastic consent is so important that just rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah, enthusiastic positive consent is very important.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. I think that there is space for people who consent to and choose, and I'm going to frame it in that way, who choose to have sex even if they're not necessarily in the mood for it, not necessarily wanting it, in the same way that I might go and see a movie because my girlfriend has a crush on Keanu Reeves and she really wants to see some bullshit sci-fi that's only playing at the Dollar Theater, and I might go along with that. And I might have a good goddamn time, even if it's a bad movie. It's good company, it's a fun experience. And so there is perhaps in rare occasions a certain amount of grin and bear itness. But when we're talking about sex, we want to make sure that that is not the mainstay, because you can't build a relationship on that. You can't build a relationship on only seeing movies that you don't want to see, on only spending time with their family that you can't stand, of only doing the things that they want to do. And there's a huge difference between, well, this is something that you were really excited about, and I'll go along with it, and I'll do that for you. I'm good giving and game in the sense that I'm game for something that you're excited about, even if it's not necessarily what I'm interested in or what I'm interested in right now. But that's a far cry from feeling obligated to have sex with somebody and then to lie about the sexual experience that you're actually having.
Yeah. Right, and it kind of comes down to, and I don't know, maybe this is extreme, but for one, bodily autonomy. Do you still have bodily autonomy if you're saying, okay, whatever, do what you're going to do, and I'll just be here even though I don't want to? And are you really giving consent if you don't want to do something? I mean, it's kind of complicated, right?
And even if you have to mentally go to a completely different place to be able to
Yeah, there's a huge difference between, if you don't spend Christmas at my parents', I'm going to divorce you or break up with you or whatever, versus okay, yeah, I get it. It's your dad's birthday. We'll go and we'll go to the barbecue and I'll hang out and play nice for a couple of hours. And I know I'm, using these sort of abstract metaphors and different things, but yeah, I definitely think that there is a difference between being coerced into something that you are not willing to do versus being willing to say, yeah, okay, I'll do this for you. That's very, very different. And nobody should ever have sex that they are feeling forced into, that they're feeling pressured into, that they're feeling manipulated into, that, if no is not an acceptable answer, then you didn't really ask a question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that kind of sex is categorically wrong. Nobody should ever be forcing anybody else, coercing anybody else into having sex with them. Does that categorically mean that nobody can ever have sex when they're not particularly feeling into it or up for it? No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. But because our culture has been so far in one particular direction, anything that even looks like potentially going along to get along or just sort of being open or game for something that you're not necessarily excited about starts to look and feel very rapey. And I think that that's something we need to be very sensitive to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was going to say too is I know a lot of people, again, particularly women, who don't think that they have been raped, but then they describe situations that are rape.
Yeah.
So, including being manipulated or gaslighted or, coerced into sex that they don't want to have. And so really it turns into this huge gray area where at what point is it acceptable and what point is it rapey?
Yeah. And I think that gray area gets a whole lot less gray when people are having open and informed conversations about what consent actually looks like, about what rape actually is. Because if those women fully felt like they had autonomy and the right to choose over their bodies, then that gray area would evaporate very quickly.
And I would also say that if you fear any kind of negative consequence for saying no, that is not right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, whether that's, whether that's physical violence or whether that's just a pissy attitude, that's still a negative consequence for saying no, and no woman should face a negative consequence for saying no.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe I'm just haven't been in these kinds of relationships, but to me, I can't imagine not being in the mood and then agreeing to go ahead and have sex with a partner if I didn't fear a negative consequence. And like you said, it usually is just a pissy mood or and this is another aspect of it too, is if your partner feels undesirable because you won't have sex with them, is it then your responsibility as a partner to make them feel desirable in that way,
Right.
Yeah, it's a very human question, but I would say strictly that nobody is ever responsible for anybody else's self-identity, for the way anybody else feels. We are not responsible for anything outside of our control. And the reality is we cannot control the way other people look and feel and, perceive anything. So,
behave.
Yeah. So it's very frustrating to me that this is still a question. But I recognize that it is in a lot of ways because I know I've been in that position. I know I've been in situations where I've had partners where if we didn't have sex, they would somehow think that meant something about how I felt about them, or think something about themselves, or think something about me and my commitment to the relationship, or all of these different things. And people are moody, and they're allowed to have those moods. They're allowed to love you and not want to have sex with you today or at all.
Or,
and letting everyone know that that's okay, that that's acceptable is a very difficult and tricky thing in our culture.
And to remember that enthusiastic consent is also important.
It's enthusiastic. I think another thing that can help inform and make the gray area less gray is a deeper understanding between the two people. So if two people have like a relationship that and an understanding of each other, like over 10 years of dating and knowing each other very, very well, then there's at that point that those two individuals have a better read on, what another person is willing to do and at what point they would be coercing the other person. And at that point, they're better able to understand and not, force things or feel coercive at all, right?
So really what you're saying is communication.
Yeah, is communication in large part.
Which, as to just wrap it all back, open and honest communication assumes and expects a opportunity to say or give any answer. You can't ask a question if you're already anticipating the answer or if you're going to punish a particular answer. And so nobody should be having any kind of sex with anybody else if they can't openly and honestly talk about what they want and what they don't want, whether it is, getting into the far-flung and the kinky and the everything, or whether it's even talking about whether or not to have it or to do it. Yeah. And if you can't even tell somebody, hey, when you put your arm around me when I'm trying to sleep, it like feels nice, but I can't ever actually fall asleep, then that's somebody that you shouldn't be spending the night with if you can't tell them that openly.
Right.
Yeah.
And these are a lot of shoulds and a lot of rights and wrongs. I know that these things in the moment feel very nuanced and personal and complicated, but I think we should all be striving for relationships that are open and honest and communicative.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't know if you guys have another minute.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So another aspect of the whole topic too is if two people get into a relationship and in the beginning, let's say you're going through your honeymoon phase and fucking like rabbits all the time, and then after time, one of your partners doesn't want to have sex as much. Do you think that it's acceptable or valid for someone to be upset that there's not sex happening anymore when that was kind of the foundation of the relationship, or going into that relationship, that person was under the impression that there would be having more sex in that relationship?
So yeah, can I jump in there?
Yeah.
I can already hear y'all. I would say absolutely, you have every right to be very upset. You can be as upset as you want to be. You are not to be held accountable for having that emotion. However, if you being upset means that you are stomping around, it means that you are breaking things, that you are being an asshole, that you are saying rude things, that you are punishing somebody, your words and your actions, you're very much responsible for. So you can be upset. That's your right. You can feel whatever you want to feel, think whatever you want to think.
Keep it on the inside.
And you can even express it in a way that's kind and gentle and,
So what I will say is what's key is not just is communication again, and also having the self-awareness and maturity to know, what, I'm feeling upset. Why am I feeling upset? It's because I thought we were going to always be bunnies of the sexual variety, and now we're not. The best case scenario, given those set of circumstances, is for the person who is feeling upset to communicate how they feel to their partner.
Well, and really, if we zoom out
again,
to a sociological
when I say communicate,
level,
I don't mean through stomping and shouting.
And being a dick.
You mean in conversation.
Yeah, I mean, hey.
Gentle, loving conversation.
Using your big boy words.
Yeah, as we zoom out, the best case scenario is that people have a language and an opportunity to not be stuck on a specific type of relationship that isn't right for them. That they know going into a relationship that there's always opportunity for flexibility, for different models of a relationship. By no means am I saying that everybody listening needs to go out and become polyamorous or jump into an open relationship or these types of things. I do, however, think that our concept of how a relationship is supposed to work, that it's supposed to start, boy meets girl. Sometimes we'll put an asterisk on that and perhaps include other people, but not often, but people meet, they have a couple of flirty dates, they have a ton of sex, they move in together, they have a ton more sex, then they settle into a rut, then they get married, then they have kids. That model is fine, but it is not the only one. And people don't feel like they have a choice, and so they find themselves making decisions that they never really consented to or were enthusiastic about. And so they get stuck in this situation that is never right for them, and they don't know why, and they are mad at their partner when, you know, I don't want to say they should be mad at themselves because they didn't even really feel like they had a choice either. Our society didn't give them one.
The expectation that the status quo will not change.
Yeah.
Which is unrealistic.
Yeah, and
Definitely,
if people have an opportunity to know what they're getting into and to know what they want and know that there are multiple options. I mean, I'm almost talking about some like sci-fi utopia much down the road, but I sincerely believe that with the, you know, the advent of marriage equality and these different changes that we've made, that we are headed in the right direction, but that our opportunities in relationship are still so stymied and so limited by the models that we see, by the expectations, by our social and legal institutions. I mean, we don't have time for me to do an entire another episode on this, but I think that these are really important things.